Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I trust you all had a restful Mid-Autumn Festival holiday, and thank you for your patience in clearing security. It's a beautiful mid-autumn day, and for those of you who left Shanghai for the long weekend, welcome back. My name is Paul Liu, Chairman of the Organizing Committee, and on behalf of the committee, I'd like to welcome you to the Barnett-Oksenberg Lecture on Sino-American Relations. We gather here to celebrate 35 years since the normalization of relations between the U.S. and China, with one of the architects of that historic and seminal event, President Jimmy Carter. Before we begin, let me say a few words about the lecture series, after which Jan Barris will introduce our honored guests. The lecture series, which is now in its 9th year, is meant to honor Doak Barnett and Michael Oksenberg and their contributions to Sino-American relations. Doak Barnett and Mike Oksenberg were two American scholars and policymakers of distinction, whose writings and actions had a powerful impact on bilateral relations dating back to the 1960s. Doak Barnett was born and raised in Shanghai, where his father was a missionary and worked for the YMCA. Growing up not far from here, Doak went on to teach at Columbia University and Johns Hopkins University, where an entire generation of American China scholars were influenced by his writings and teachings. During the 1960s, Doak was one of the earliest voices calling for a dialogue with China, despite the deep differences between the two countries at that time. His testimonies to Congress, his learned behind-the-scenes efforts, and his counsel to, amongst others, President Johnson, helped to begin the process of changes in attitude and policy toward China. Doak's influence on policy were truly enormous. Michael Oksenberg was an outstanding student of Doak Barnett while at Columbia, and himself went on to teach at University of Michigan, where he had a distinguished career. Mike also raised an entire generation of scholars and students to understand China better. Mike eventually served in the National Security Council of President Carter's administration, where he played an important role in laying the groundwork for normalization of relations. Like some of you here today, I had the privilege of studying under both Doak and Mike, and it is my desire and that of the organizing committee to honor them today. Both Doak and Mike were scholars of distinction who straddled both academia and policymaking. They both had a great admiration for China's culture, history, and traditional values, yet advocated hard-headed and realistic policymaking. They both took a long-term view on the incredible possibilities of harmonious relations between our two countries, despite the inevitable tensions arising from deeper and broader engagement. Although Mike and Doak have passed, we continue to honor them, and by honoring them, we also honor the many people in both countries who continue to secure the foundations of the relationship between the U.S. and China. The lecture format is structured to be a dialogue, which includes your involvement as an audience. An American's lecture is commented on by a Chinese commentator, and the audience is then free to ask questions in an open forum. We hope that this year's dialogue will be lively and engaging. We would like to thank our sponsors whose generosity made this event possible. The 4 sponsors this year are Citibank, the international law firm of Clifford Chance, Coca-Cola, and finally Dow. All 4 of these companies have sponsored the lecture in years past, and as such, we are particularly grateful for their continued support. We also want to thank in particular the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai and their very able event team for their incredible work in doing all the logistics for today's event and for their continued critical support. Finally, included in our audience are at least 50 Chinese and American graduate students whose specialty is Sino-American relations. They hail from the top universities in Shanghai and also from the Hopkins Nanjing Center, where American and Chinese students live and study together, considering the thorny issues and possibilities of our complex relationship. They are part of our relationship, part of the future of our relationship, as are all of you. Thank you for your continued engagement and for all being responsible stakeholders in the future of Sino-American relations. I will now pass the podium to Jan Barris of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. Jan, who is known to many of you on the U.S. and Chinese side, is one of those tireless, behind-the-scenes individuals who have advanced bilateral relations for the past 43 years since she joined the National Committee in 1971. In many ways, Jan is the institutional memory of the relationship on the U.S. side, and she has been deeply involved since the days of ping-pong diplomacy. The relationship owes much to her efforts at the National Committee. So Jan, over to you. I hope you enjoy the lecture. Thank you very much for coming.
I'm sorry, I can't quite see you all because I'm very short. And these flowers, they're beautiful flowers, are a little bit higher than I am, so I'm here behind the flowers. Paul, thank you for that very lovely introduction. Paul gave me his remarks to read before a couple days ago, but he didn't include that last few sentences about me, so thank you. That was very kind of you. So you all know I'm Jan Barris, the Vice President of the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
There we go, okay. Okay, I won't start all over again, but I'm Jan Barris, and I'm just delighted to welcome you on behalf of both the National Committee on U.S. China Relations, which is one of the two host organizations of this annual event, and as part of the organizing committee of the Barnett-Oksenberg Lecture Series. I'm just delighted to welcome all of you here and to welcome such a large crowd. We've now been running this lecture series for 9 years, and this is the biggest crowd we've ever had. Almost 500 people signed up, and more would have if we'd had a bigger room. We're sure that's a testimony to several things. We've had a lot of wonderful speakers participate in this over the past several years, but today is a very special day because we have such a distinguished speaker with us, President Jimmy Carter. It's also very special because this is the 35th anniversary of the normalization of relations between our two countries, and it was his vision and the vision of the two men whom this lecture honors that really made that momentous event happen. So we're extraordinarily pleased and honored that President Carter and his wife could be here with us today to celebrate this and to give this lecture. I will tell you a little secret. I don't know. Wei, I'm sorry if this is telling a secret, but originally, in planning for the 35th anniversary, we were going to ask Dr. Brzezinski to come to this event. And I'd been all set to do that. In fact, Paul and Renwei and I had decided that's who we would invite this year because it was the 35th anniversary. And then Liu Yawei, who is the head of the China division of the Carter Center, visited our office several months ago. And I had told Paul and Renwei that for sure I would call Dr. Brzezinski by the end of that week. And it was a good thing that I procrastinated because Yawei came to our office and he said, "Do you have a speaker yet for the 35th anniversary year of normalization for the Barnett-Oksenberg Lecture?" And I said, "No, we don't. I'm about to, I hope, because I'm about to call Dr. Brzezinski." He said, "Well, how would you like to have the president instead?" And I said, "That would be just wonderful. We would be delighted." And indeed, we all are, and everyone in this room being here is a testament to how pleased we are that you're here with us. There are several other people here that I would like to mention. We have been very, very fortunate that every year since the beginning of this lecture series, Doak Barnett's widow, Jean Barnett, has joined us, and she is here again with us this year, and we are so pleased to have Jean come with us, and her brother, Peter Badu, who is first time in China. And so if the two of you would just like to raise your hands. Jean, you'd like to stand up. But Jean is not the only Barnett who is in this room. For the last couple of years, we've been very fortunate to have both the second generation and now a third generation of Barnett family. Doak's nephew, James, and his wife, May, and Doak's great-nephew, Chris, and his wife, Heather, all four of whom live and work in Beijing, are here with us today as well. And I know Doak would be so proud and so pleased to know that what started with his father and grandfather, or his father? With his father, who ran the YMCA here in Shanghai, that two future generations are also living and working in China and loving the people as much as Doak did. Unfortunately, Mike Oksenberg's widow died several years ago. Before she did, though, she came with Jean every year for about the first 4 years of this lecture. And President Carter, I've been asked specially to tell you from Mike's children, David and Deborah, that they wished very, very much that they could be here. Their work prevented them from doing so, but they asked me to please thank you specially and tell you how much you meant to their father and how much the work that he did with you meant to him. And so I want you to know that they're with us in spirit, although they can't be here. We also have several Chinese guests who I would like to mention, sitting here in the front row. First is Zhou Qizhan, former Minister of the State Council's Information Office, but many of you in this room know him better. You know him from his years as Vice Mayor of Shanghai, and I know him from then as the man who pushed through Pudong and made Pudong what it is today. I remember years ago coming here and Vice Mayor Zhou telling us about this place that when you looked at it, it was just sort of grassland and farms. And he says, one day very soon, it's going to be this wonderful place with tall buildings and transportation. And very honestly, I don't think many Americans believed him. And he and others here made it come true. So we're delighted that he can be here with us. Also here is Xie Yuan, who is the Vice Chairman of the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries. And the Friendship Association is the group that the Carter Center works with very closely, and Xie Yuan and his boss Li Xiaolin, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, have been accompanying President Carter and Kuangdi throughout their visit to China. And then two Shanghai hands and old friends of the committees, and I'm very pleased to welcome them, is Vice Chairman of the Shanghai People's Political Consultative Conference, Zhou Han-min. And an old friend of mine and someone I'm just so delighted to see again after many years is Suga, who's a former academic, but also more recently the ambassador. Suga, stand up, okay? The ambassador to Iceland and Suriname. Excuse me. There are many other distinguished people in the room, both Americans and Chinese, that I would love to mention, people who've devoted their lives, or at least their professional careers, to making the relationship between our two countries better. I wish I had time to mention you all, but we need to keep on track, and so I'm going to turn this over to Kuangdi. I'm sorry, Zhou Mingwei. Zhou Mingwei. Zhou Mingwei, who will introduce Kuangdi. Okay.
Thank you, Jane. Honorable President and Mrs. Carter, Your Excellency, Chairman Kuangdi, esteemed Mrs. Barnett, ladies and gentlemen. Today's Barnett-Oksenberg Lecture here is in beautiful surroundings of a Xizhao guest house is of particular significance. As you know, the lecture are organized by Shanghai Association of American Studies, the American Chamber of Commerce of Shanghai, and the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. But this year's lecture is also part of the program of activities organized by Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries and the Carter Center to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between China and the United States. Shanghai was, of course, the birthplace of the Shanghai Communique, which was of such historical significance in the development of Sino-US relations. Less than 8 years after the signing of Shanghai Communique, thanks to the determination of Mr. Deng Xiaoping and then President Carter, China and the United States established diplomatic ties and fully normalized their relationship since then. The Xijiao Guest House is also one of the favorite places for Deng Xiaoping, a very historical location. Deng Xiaoping often chose to stay here and issued many important policies from here. So the 35th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the United States is also the 35th anniversaries of China's reform and opening up. So this guest house holds many historical memories of the chief architect of China's reform. Today, of course, we are so honored to have with us one of the two great decision makers of those days, the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. President Carter will deliver a keynote speech for today's event. It is a great privilege to be able to share his deep insights and rich experience of a true witness of the history. President Carter, believe it or not, he is in his 90 years old this year, but he is still as bright, alert, and quick-witted as ever. Since leaving his office right up to present day, he has tirelessly continued to play a role on international stage. His concern for a healthy U.S. China relations and peace, stability in the East Asia has led him to make countless trips across the Pacific Ocean. We believe that President Carter will make new contributions to build a new type of great power relationship between China and the United States. Now, may I have the honor of inviting President Carter to make an address. Please show your appreciations for his talk, which is entitled Reflections.
Well, first of all, I appreciate very much that introduction, and especially appreciate being with Mrs. Barnett. It's an honor for me. I've heard about your husband for many years in my life, and it's a great pleasure to meet you and your family who are here. I've been asked tonight to give my own reflections on the relationship between our two countries, and I thought I continue to study that history for the rest of my life into now. Later, I became an officer in the U.S. Navy myself. I was on a submarine. And in a very important historical time, in 1949, in the early summer, I came to Shanghai. I visited also in Hong Kong, and I've spent a couple of weeks in what used to be Tsingtao, but now it's Qingdao. I always call it Tsingtao. So we just came from Qingdao. And at that time, as you know, the forces of Mao Zedong were prepared to take over these port cities. And I think my ship was the last one here before that occurred. A few months later, the People's Republic of China was born on the first day of October 1949. And that was also my birthday. So I'm... And Deng Xiaoping always thought that was a matter of fate because I'm 25 years older than the People's Republic of China government. This also happens to be the 110th year after Deng Xiaoping was born. He was 20 years older than I, but he became a very close friend, just like an older brother with me. Long before I became President of the United States, I was determined to correct a 30-year error in my country's policies and to have normal relationships with the People's Republic of China. I was thrilled when President Nixon came here to Shanghai in 1972 and signed the Shanghai Communique and declared that there was only one China. And I was disappointed when he didn't say which one. And for the next 6 years, under him and his successor in office, it was Taiwan. And when I became elected president and was preparing to take office, Dr. Brzezinski, whom I chose to be my national security advisor, and I discussed how we could go about having normal relations with China to build upon the wonderful achievement of President Nixon and Chu Enlai. Particularly from Mike, I heard about Doak Barnett, because whenever I asked him a complicated question about China, he would say, well, Doak Barnett said so-and-so. So I felt like I was getting advice from your husband as well as from Mike Barnett, from Mike Oksenberg. So that was one of the wonderful events of my life. I might point out to you that Deng Xiaoping and I negotiated very secretly with each other. And I sent a man named Leonard Woodcock over here. Leonard Woodcock was not a diplomat. He was the toughest labor negotiator I knew. And so I wanted to have a good negotiator. And we never sent a single message through the State Department, because many people in the State Department did not want me to negotiate with Deng Xiaoping and to have normal relations with China. And most of the members of the U.S. Congress were also against the decision that I had already made myself. So we negotiated in complete secrecy. And I might say that we were not naive or ignorant at that time. We analyzed the situation in the Western Pacific, in the Asian region, and we both saw that this area had been afflicted with a long series of terrible armed conflicts. The United States was involved, as you know, on the side of China during the Chinese-Japanese War. And the Flying Tigers were heroes of mine. And I was very interested in seeing that relationship. And then later, of course, we had the Second World War. And then came the Korean War. I was in a submarine during the Korean War in the Pacific Ocean. And then came Vietnam. And our oldest son was in the war in Vietnam. So both of us saw that this region had been afflicted with a constant stream of armed conflicts. And my great hope, and the dream of Deng Xiaoping as well, was to see the Asian region free of war, so that the people here in China and throughout this region, and those in the United States as well, could benefit from normal relations between our two countries. We had some very difficult issues between us as well, because we both had been involved deeply with the Soviet Union, and we knew that President Brezhnev would look upon the alliance between the United States and China as a threat to the Soviet Union, and might even cause the Soviet Union to resort to their major armada of nuclear weapons. So the first call that I made after Deng Xiaoping and I announced our decision on 15th of December 1978 was to President Brezhnev, to assure him that our two countries were not aligned against the Soviet Union, that we wanted to have peace and better understanding between and among our countries. And of course, the Taiwan issue was still a very sensitive issue between us two. So we had a lot of problems that we faced. I would say they were much more complex, much more difficult than any issue now that seems to divide China from the United States. We also saw that those major issues were not nearly so important as was the one single issue of China and the United States working side by side in complete harmony and peace and increasing understanding. It's not an accident that just immediately after Deng Xiaoping and I announced the decision to normalize relations on the 1st of January, 3 days later, Deng Xiaoping announced openness and reform. And I would say at this moment that every one of the 1.3 billion people in China have a better life now because Deng Xiaoping and I decided to normalize relations between our two countries. Because openness and reform has not only changed the environment and the activities and the commerce and trade of China, but has also changed for the better the people of America. And I would say, if you want to go one step further, there are 7 billion people on earth right now that are better off because Deng Xiaoping had the wisdom to agree with me to normalize diplomatic relations. So now we have a lot of questions raised. Just today, I've had sessions with students, young scholars, some Americans in universities here, and some Chinese who are studying American policy as well. And I've had questions from them. Last night, I had a session on Skype with video presentations between students at a high school in Shanghai, Shishi High School, and also high school students in Toronto, Canada, and New York City. And they were all concerned about some of the differences that exist between the United States and China. Well, we will always have differences. We have a difference in history. China with its ancient history, 6,000 years or so. The United States just a few hundred years. We have a different form of government. We have a different culture. We have different neighbors. We have a different interest. We knew those things when we normalized relations 35 years ago. They're not a surprise to us. But those differences then fade into insignificance compared to the benefits that have come from our two countries working together. Some people in America feel that our preeminent position, now kind of, I guess you would say, the #1 superpower on earth since the Soviet Union fragmented, is being endangered by the progress made by China. I don't see this as a threat. I've met many times with Xi Jinping, your president, and he always says when this issue comes up, the Pacific Ocean is big enough for both of us. And I would say that the world economy is big enough for both the economy of America, no matter how big it gets, and also that of China, which is rapidly growing. So I don't see this as a threat. We have programs at the Carter Center in 80 countries around the world. 35 of those countries are in Africa, the poorest and most deprived, backward countries, needy countries on earth. And when I go into those countries now, I see a very strong presence of China, diplomatically and with trade and commerce there. That didn't exist 25 or 30 years ago. And I believe that every one of those countries, Burkina Faso and Sudan and Mali and Ghana and so forth, every one of them is better off, their people are, to have both the United States and China wanted to have good relationships with them, with trade and commerce and better jobs and diplomatic relations. So I think that for the poor countries on earth, the competition, peaceful competition between my country and your country is a good thing for all of them. We have some problems, yes, and they'll continue in the future. But I think what I reminded the students and scholars about today is that no matter what happens in the future, the differences that exist, sometimes friendly competition, those differences fade into relative insignificance when compared with the great benefits to my country, to China, and to all countries on earth. And I would say that the dream of Deng Xiaoping, that our new friendship and our recognition of each other would be beneficial to all people, has come true. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Carter. Your talk was, as always, profoundly enlightening and inspiring. Well, to get the full benefit of such a speech, we need to have equally brilliant commentaries. And I think Chairman Kuangdi is an eminent fit for this role. As you all know, Chairman Kuangdi was formerly the vice chairman of the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. As the president of Chinese Academy of Engineering, he made a great contributions to the scientific and technological cooperation between China and the United States. As the mayor of Shanghai, he presided over the city's march towards modernization and internationalization. I don't think I need to take more about the details on this. What I want to draw your attention is that Chairman Xu Kuangdi now is the president of Sino-U.S Friendship Association, and he is engaging on a daily basis in people-to-people diplomacy between China and the United States. He has a deep understanding of the Sino-U.S relations and always has valuable views on this subject. I'm sure he's going to add some extra details to President Carter's account that will help us to understand how relationship between the two countries will be developed. Now, Chairman Xu Kuangdi.
President, Madam, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. May I use Chinese? Because the Chinese is much easier for me compared with English. 尊敬的卡特总统和夫人，女士们、先生们、朋友们，值此中美建交35周年之际，我很高兴地出席鲍大可 Oksenberg 讲座，并且有机会聆听了卡特总统刚才精彩、坦率和真诚的演讲，体会到了您深入洞察历史进程的方法和宽容谦逊的胸怀。大家都知道，卡特总统是中美建交的决策者之一。当时你和中国改革开放的总设计师邓小平同志共同以战略家的政治勇气和智慧，重新开启了两国交往的大门。35年过去了，中美关系经历了风雨，走过了一条起伏曲折的道路，但是两国之间的共同利益远远大于相互的差异。今天的讲座是由上海市美国学会和上海美国商会共同举办的。30年前，中美之间曾经为袜子的贸易配额吵得不可开交，而今天两国之间的贸易总量已经超过5000亿美元。中方购买美国的国债达到1.3万亿美元，由邓小平先生亲自提议并派往美国的第一批留学生是56名，而过去几年双方交流的学生每年都在10万人以上，而且56名是国家付钱，这10万人9900多都是自己付钱，99000多都是自己付钱，自费生，说明两国之间的经济、两国之间的文化教育交流是多么的密切。今天中国已经是美国海外留学生的第一来源国，双方游客人数更是每年超过数百万。卡特总统先生刚才讲了他和邓小平谈判关系正常化的一个秘密的艰苦的历程。我想问一下总统先生，当年在建交的时候，是不是想到过，在35年里，双方会有这么大的变化？时至今日，美国作为最大的发达国家和中国作为最大的发展中国家之间，已经形成了事实上的经济利益的共同体。刚才卡特总统深情地回忆和介绍了Oksenberg和鲍大可两位努力推进中美关系的美国学者和政治家。正因为中美双方都有这样有远见的先驱者，才有中美关系的今天。中国传统文化教育我们要饮水思源，喝水不忘掘井人， 我想，这种文化传统和价值观，在两国人民的心里是相通的。去年9月，习近平主席和奥巴马总统在加州的安娜伯格庄园会晤时，习主席曾经连提了3问：我们需要一个什么样的中美关系？中美应该进行什么样的合作来实现共赢？中美应该怎样携手合作来促进世界和平与发展？充分表明了中方希望促进中美关系发展的美好愿望。美国总统奥巴马重申了美国非常欢迎中国作为一个世界强国继续和平崛起，并且表示中国继续走成功发展的道路符合美国的利益。一个和平的、稳定的、繁荣的中国，不仅对中国有利，对美国有利，对世界也有利。今年的7月10号，在中美人文高层交流磋商的联合开幕式致辞中，习主席强调，中美双方要审时度势，登高望远，互相尊重，增进互信，加强合作，携手推进新型大国关系建设。奥巴马总统做了书面致辞，他表示，美方不认为守成大国，就是已经建成的大国，和新兴大国之间的冲突是不可避免的。美中可以竞争，但绝不冲突。他再次重申，美国不谋求遏制中国，希望见到一个和平、稳定、繁荣的中国。这个周明伟先生提醒我讲得慢一点，因为中文的一个音节就是一个字，美国平均要4.5个音才能说一个单词。总统先生、女士们、先生们、朋友们，国之交在于民相亲，民相亲基于情相通，透明的、真诚的交换意见，沟通分歧，最后达到求同存异。这是中国传统的儒家文化的交友之道。所谓君子和而不同，这就是中华民族传统文化中社会生活的一个最高的境界。作为原上海市长和一个老上海市民，我衷心地欢迎卡特总统和夫人访问上海。上海是打开中美关系的《上海公报》签订和发表的地方。上海也是美国企业较为集中的城市。上海市美国商会是上海改革开放的见证人，也是上海发展的积极参与。作为中美友协会长，我曾多次陪同卡特总统访华到各地，并聆听他的精彩演讲。今天我要再一次感谢并表达我的衷心的钦佩。您在90高龄仍为我们做了一个精神卓硕、深切透彻的演讲。我想代表在座的所有中国朋友，祝您寿比南山，青春常在，更祝中美关系乘风破浪，不断前进。谢谢大家。
Thank you very much, Chairman Xu Kuangdi, for your wonderful remarks. I think your remarks are truly insightful and valuable. Now, come to the very interesting part of the event. I would like to invite the head of the Shanghai Association of American Studies, Professor Huang Renwei, my good friend, to chair the session of questions and answers. Please, Huang Renwei.
Turn on this. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to chair the question and the answers. So everyone raise your hand if you want a question. Yeah, first one, this. But one note, give your name and what you institute, and be shorten your question. Please, Xia.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Professor Xia Liping from Tongji University. I enjoy the two keynote speeches very much, and also very appreciate President Carter's great contribution to the establishment of China-U.S. diplomatic relations. I have a question for President Carter. During recent years, China and the United States share more common interests in both economic fields and security fields. Now, however, both countries still lack of enough strategic trust. Now, Obama administration pursues a rebalancing strategy in the Asia-Pacific region. In your opinion, what is the major purpose of rebalancing strategy? And because now China, I think now in China some people are concerned about. And also, in your opinion, how to improve the strategic trust between China and the United States? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, Professor Wang, would you repeat the question so I can?
Yeah, he said there is some strategic interest between two countries. How to improve and reduce this strategic distrust? Yes.
Reduce the risk strategically for the bilateral relations.
Well,
And how do you think about the President Obama's rebalance policy in the...
I've had a lot of questions about the President Obama's claiming that he's rebalancing the situation in the Western Pacific or Asia. And I pointed out to many people that this is not true. The United States has, all my life and for several generations back, the United States has had a major role to play in this part of the world. As I pointed out in my comments, we were fighting side by side with the Chinese against the Japanese many years ago when I was a small boy, and earlier than that, American ships were here in the early 1800s, hoping to open up China even more to the outside world. And if you look at the geography of this region, the United States has very close ties of friendship and cooperation, sometimes military alliances, with Australia, with New Zealand, with Singapore, with Japan, with South Korea, with the Philippines, and now even increasing with Vietnam. So we're not here for the first time. And I don't think that President Obama ever meant that he was going to try to usurp or to take over the dominant role in this region, which I think really belongs to China, as long as China has friendly relationships with those same countries. There are some new nations that have just come into being, new governments. One is Myanmar, formerly Burma. I've been to Myanmar several times. The Carter Center has an office full-time in Rangoon, which now is called Yangon. And so we see there that there's going to be some competition of a friendly nature between China and the United States in Myanmar. But I think that people in Myanmar are going to be better off in the long term having the United States and China both interested in their country, particularly if China and the United States can work side by side as friends and not in a feeling of animosity or ugly competition. So I think, as I pointed out, President Xi Jinping several times has told me that the Pacific is very large, is large enough for both the United States and China, and I don't feel a threat at all to our future friendship.
Excuse me.
Well, the strategic mistrust exists between a lot of countries. We have, very strong military I don't think any nation can challenge the United States in the strength of our military. But the best way to resolve that is the same way that Deng Xiaoping and I resolved the 30 years of animosity between our two countries, by discussing with each other, searching for common ground, and understanding the integrity and differences that will always exist between us, and respecting each other. I think that's the most important single word to use as we relate to China and as China relates to the United States, is mutual respect. I don't think there's any doubt that in the future, China will be number one economically. And of course, China will be just as strong militarily as you choose to be. And that is not a matter of a threat to the United States. Another thing is that we have come to realize that it's not just China that's becoming stronger and stronger in the world, but also other countries. I would say India, Russia, South Africa, Brazil, and I could name many others, have now begun to increase their influence in the world. And the United States of America is going to have to accommodate this in a peaceful way. So I think mutual respect, understanding, communication, diplomatic relationships, private conversations that will take place in November when President Obama comes again to China for the APEC conference. I think he and President Xi Jinping are very likely to have very quiet, very mutually understandable conversations, just like they did in China, in the United States this past year.
Thank you. Next question, please.
President Carter.
Your name and
Yes, I'm sorry. Stephen Harder with the international law firm of Clifford Chance.
Yes.
And one of the sponsors proudly today. Thank you. President Carter, when you were president, I'm sure you had many dealings with the New York Times. The New York Times for the last year or so has been very difficult to read for Chinese. I wondered, if you're speaking to Chinese leaders, would you tell them that a great country like China should be afraid or worried if their citizens read the New York Times?
Well, the last thing I want to do is to try to speak for the U.S. Congress. I don't think anybody can understand really what's going on in the U.S. Congress at this moment. But you have to realize that the American president is the one that sets foreign policy, basically. That's one privilege that the United States Constitution provides. And when I decided to normalize diplomatic relations with China, I didn't have the support of the Congress. But the President of the United States has a unilateral right to recognize whatever government we want as the official government of a nation. And I recognize that the United States recognize them.
It's hard for us up
Yeah,
here
we can't hear.
what you're saying. There's a little, I know, I will. There's a little bit of, but I just want you to know, there's a little bit of fuzziness.
Jane, you should press your phone on.
Well,
He wants you to know if you could tell Chinese leaders that they shouldn't be afraid for Chinese to read their
yes. It would be good if your questioner would come right in front, because it just resonates in the back, and if it's not your voice, it's just hard to hear up here. That's one disparity that I pointed out to many leaders on this trip, including the Vice President of China. When American reporters come here, not only from the New York Times, but from other media as well, they have a good many restraints on them about what they can report. And if they report something that the Chinese leaders don't like, then in the future they know that they will be cut off from access to Chinese government officials. We have an opposite policy in the United States. We have freedom of the press. And I don't think any Chinese reporter that goes to Washington or goes to Atlanta or goes to Los Angeles or San Francisco or Chicago would feel under any limitations. They can report what they see and feel about the United States, even if it's unpopular. So we have a difference of policy there, and we understand that in China, when I normalized diplomatic relations with Deng Xiaoping, and now there are some very, very special restraints on what can be said in criticism of the government. We don't have that in the United States nearly as badly. And another thing that I might say is that I hope that in the future that the New York Times, which is probably our preeminent news medium in the United States, and perhaps the most trusted one, would be welcome back here again. And I know that the New York Times has some very troubling reports made about the wealth that has grown among Chinese prominent leaders in the past. And the thing that I would say is very encouraging to me is that President Xi Jinping's policy of rooting out corruption, even in the most prominent leaders in China, has sent a very wonderful signal of a positive nature to everybody in the United States. Everybody in the United States knows of the great and very successful anti-corruption policy that President Xi Jinping has undertaken. So I think that's the best answer to your question, is what's already taking place by President Xi Jinping and other leaders in this country to correct former corruption that did exist.
Since this question is related with the media and the press, we'll have an expert on this issue. May I ask Minister Zhao Qizheng to say something on this issue? Please.
黄仁伟先生，你把难题移交给我。
Yes.
中国的确是对一些美国的报纸或记者有某些限制，这是事实。但这个原因呢，美国人可能不太容易理解。我们并不反对报道中国的某些阴暗面，或中国政府的缺点。问题是，有的记者，他报道的一些事情与中国实际情况不符合，也不符合美国的新闻的原则。有的时候呢，的确是挑拨了中国的民族关系。这一点呢，中国是很忌讳的。在美国，也不允许对一些民族之间的问题做一种过度的评价和歪曲。那么中国也是同样的。也许我们不是对整个的美国的媒体，而是对美国的某些报纸的某些时候的报道我们不满意。《纽约时报》是世界上最古老的也最有权威的报纸。苏兹伯格先生也和我专门为了这个问题见过面。我对他说没有问题，中国会进一步开放的，但是我希望呢，美国记者在中国要从事记者应该从事的那些活动，避免一些秘密的工作，如此而已。请放心，中国新闻自由也是会越来越自由的。好，谢谢。
Thank you. So we have the last line. 最后一排的那个举手的，哎。
您好，卡特先生，我是解放日报的记者。我想问一下，就是您刚才在演讲中提到，您多次见到习近平主席，我想问一下，你们私下里面会聊一点什么话题？还有就是11月份习奥会将举行，那么您如果是奥巴马总统，您还想对习主席说些什么？谢谢。
Thank you.
Well, when President Xi Jinping and I talked to each other, as I've talked to almost all of the Chinese leaders since Deng Xiaoping, we discussed matters that cause me concern about the friendship and understanding between our two countries. The Carter Center now is a life of me and my wife. And I would say that the number one foreign policy question in this region of the world, for me, for the rest of my life, will be to build upon and protect the relationship between China and the United States and keep it on a positive path. And we'd like to make sure if Xi Jinping has questions to ask me about American policy, what do I think, I give him my honest opinion. One thing that I've discussed with him, by the way, several times, has been the possibility of the United States and China being the leading countries in addressing the basic problem of climate change or global warming, I think almost every scientist in America, and perhaps most of them in China, agree that this is a great threat to the future well-being of all human beings on Earth, with the climate changing because of the cloudy atmosphere with carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and others that are causing gradual warming. And the seas are rising and so forth. And for the last, I'd say 15 years, there has not been any leader in trying to bring about a correction to this problem. If China, the #1 developing country on Earth, which has very bad problems with air and water pollution, and the United States, the #1 industrialized country on Earth, also with very bad polluting atmosphere, if we could just agree on any positive recommendations, I think this would transform the attitude of the entire world. I think that India, Europe, and the rest of the world would go along with it. And I might point out that a key date for all of us to remember is March of next year, which is just a few months from now. At that moment, every country in the world will be requested by the United Nations to give our individual plans on how we expect to address the issue of global warming or climate change. And it would be very good if China and the United States, prepared by scientists but then spoken for by the presidents, would have a common approach to this great problem. Those are the kind of things with which I discuss with Xi Jinping and other leaders of China. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, President Carter. My name is Gerard Willis. I work with Honeywell. I'm the general counsel here in China. I've had a 25-year career in China, and I suppose I have to thank you for that. When you campaigned for president, one of your campaign themes was a drawdown of American forces in South Korea.
Yes.
And you struggled with the Korea question as president, General Singlaub and all of that. I wonder how you feel now, both about American presence there and what possible solutions may be available, particularly in cooperation with China, to that very tense.
Okay. Well, as some of you may know, in 1994, when Kim Il-sung was still the revered leader of North Korea, I might almost say worshipped leader of North Korea, the United States was preparing to condemn the government of North Korea and personally to condemn Kim Il-sung as a criminal. And I had some friends from China come to my home in Plains, Georgia, and they told me that this would be an insult that North Korea could not accept, and that if Kim Il-sung was branded as a criminal by the United Nations, supported by the United States, that North Korea would attack South Korea. So because of that, I decided to go to North Korea. And my wife and I spent many hours negotiating with Kim Il-sung. And we reached out a complete agreement, which was finally put into effect in official tone by President Clinton and his subordinates, a meeting in Geneva. And that solved the problem of nuclearization by North Korea. Kim Il-sung agreed to do away with his nuclear forces. Unfortunately, after George W. Bush became president of the United States, he threw that agreement in the wastebasket. He declared that North Korea was an evil power, and therefore he would not abide by that agreement. Since then, North Korea has begun to develop nuclear capabilities. My own hope is that we could reopen the six power talks between, as you know, the United States and South Korea and China and Russia and so forth, and Japan and North Korea. The last one was held in China many years ago, and I have urged President Obama to open up new ways to communicate with the people with the officials in North Korea. What the North Koreans tell me they want is just a guarantee that the United States will not attack North Korea. And of course, they want to see the 62 years of economic sanctions lifted as well. Ever since the Korean War was over, the United States has done everything it could to destroy the economy of North Korea. And we've been successful in helping do that. I'm not criticizing the United States, I'm not defending North Korea, but there are both sides to the issue. I've been to North Korea two times since then, and met with the North Koreans. So I would just like to see some means open up so the United States and North Korea could communicate with each other and seek a common ground as China and I did 35 years ago.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, Mr. Carter. I'm a sophomore student majoring in international affairs, and I would like to ask a question. As has been mentioned before, China has now become the country sending the biggest number of students to America for studying abroad, and in exchange, we have a lot of American students coming to China every year. So do you think that this rising tendency would have a significant impact on Sino-American relations, and how? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one of the issues that faced me and Deng Xiaoping when we normalized relations was, how do we open up our society to the other side? And a few weeks after the 1st of January, when Deng Xiaoping came back to Beijing, I sent my national science advisor, Dr. Frank Press, to conclude an agreement on science and technology sharing, to share everything we knew about science and technology that was feasible. And I got a call from Dr. Frank Press in the middle of the night. He said he was with Deng Xiaoping. And I said, well, why do you wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning? He said, this is very important to Deng Xiaoping. And I said, what is the question? And he said, can we send 5,000 Chinese students to America? And I was quite angry. And I said, tell him to send 100,000. And I slammed the phone back down. And now, today we have 240,000 Chinese students in American universities and about 25,000 American students in Chinese universities. And I believe that that is the best guarantee that in the future, the United States and China will understand each other and remain as allies and partners, no matter what the differences might exist. Because when we learn about each other and teach future leaders of China and future leaders of America to understand the other country, that's the best guarantee we can have. It adds on to the diplomatic relations between our ambassadors and visits by presidents. It adds on to the tremendous trade and commerce back and forth by American business leaders and Chinese business leaders. But that's the most important, is to bring young people into the process and let them prepare to be leaders in political terms in the years to come.
One moment. If you have any question to Mayor Xu or Chairman Xu, please raise your hand. No. Okay. Dr. Liu, yes.
President Carter,
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned global warming as an answer to somebody's question. I just want to add one word. The urgency of the global warming.
Yes.
5 years ago, I attended a lecture on the campus of University of Cambridge. Martin Rees, who was a former president of the British Society, equal to all National Academy of Science. He wrote a booklet. The title of the book was Our Final Century. If we are not going to do things to rescue the world, this century will be our last century. So I just want to add one urgency to your reply.
Fine.
And then USA as the first economy, China is the second largest economy. How could the two countries work together to save our world? the final century. What will be your comment?
Well, I think you've expressed the question and the issue much better than I did earlier. My own belief is that within the next 50 years, maybe earlier, this is the most serious problem that the world has to face. My wife and I have been in more than 145 countries in the world. And we've already seen the devastating effect of warming, changing climate, the increased number of and severity of hurricanes, the rising sea level, the melting of glaciers. These kinds of things are making dramatic changes in the world. Alaska, as you know, is part of the United States now. And when my wife and I arrived in Fairbanks, Alaska on my last trip, the headlines were, polar bears will be extinct in 25 years. The villages around the coast of Alaska are now being abandoned by Eskimos and Indians, the poorest people in Alaska. They're having to leave their homes because they don't have a barrier of ice now, and the sea level is rising, and the waves now wash over the area that used to be where their homes are located. Bolivia, where the Carter Center has many programs, will probably be the first major country to suffer from global warming because the glaciers are melting on the high mountains in Bolivia, and that's a source of bad water that they use for drinking and for cooking. And so we see very devastating effects of hurricanes now, as we saw in Philippines recently, and perhaps even worse in Bangladesh. The low-lying areas of these countries are now subject to flooding from the oceans that are rising every day. Norfolk, Virginia is where my wife and I spent our first few years of married life, and now the ocean is coming up through the sewer pipes in Norfolk, Virginia. And the areas on the coast of Norfolk, Virginia now have almost zero value for homes looking forward to the next 25 or 30 years. So these are just early indications of a very serious problem. And I hope everyone in China, particularly those of you who have any influence, will look upon this as a major challenge and let it be another means by which the United States and China can cooperate with each other and lead the rest of the world in meeting this challenge successfully. Thank you for your comments.
Okay. This question is only reserved for Chairman Xu. 如果你这问题不是提徐主席的，你就不要举手。Your question to Mr. Xu? Yeah, please.
Abdulin, Chairman of the American Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. Mayor Xi, you have been a friend of America for many years. We're going through a period where I think that the sentiments you hear is rendering a period of mistrust between both nations. In fact, we had a meeting with the president of the Asia Society of the United States recently at AmCham, who said that she felt that the mood in Washington and New York was a growing mood of a Cold War. Both you and President Carter have expressed views that talk about trust, the trust that you built, Mr. President, with Deng Xiaoping, the trust, Mayor Xi, that you built with the American community that's profound. How do we address the word trust between nations over the next few years between the United States and China?
过去也有过。正像我刚才说的，这样两个大国之间，不可能什么问题都很容易解决。那么现在的问题呢，关键是大家要按照构建新型大国关系的原则，也就是说，中国的发展，不管在经济上和军事上的发展，目的不是针对美国的。当然，我们也希望美国的重返亚太的这个计划，再平衡的这个战略，不是为了遏制中国的。尽管奥巴马总统和习近平主席都说了这个问题，但是我希望双方的媒体也好，双方的学者也好，更多的从两个国家的长远利益和从亚太地区的和平出发来做这个促进工作，而不是为一些具体的争端把这些事情来炒热来提升。我相信在11月份在北京召开 APEC 会议的时候，现在已经安排了这个习近平主席和奥巴马总统的双边的会谈。我相信通过这个会谈，只要双方有诚意、坦诚的交换意见，我相信很多困难是可以克服的。至于说美国的公司在中国的经营的情况，我觉得现在也碰到了一些问题。最主要的，美国方面抱怨的是中国的一些侵权的问题、知识产权的问题，就是中国有些山寨版，就是可能它copy了国外的一些产品，不光是美国的。那么我们正在加强关于知识产权问题的这个监督和保护。这个不仅仅是对外国企业，也对中国国内企业也有这个问题。我们想在一个法治的市场经济的国家，不应该允许有这种情况的发生。这个是保持我们国家经济、科学技术不断发展的一个重要的前提条件。另外一方面，就最近这个有一些反垄断法的条例出来，这个我们的一些工商执法部门对外国的这个在中国的企业进行不公平的竞争，比如说同样的产品在中国卖比在美国或者在欧洲他们制造本国卖要贵很多。这个呢，因为中国现在不会制造这些产品，这就牵涉到一个是否有垄断的问题，是不是利用这个技术垄断来抬高这个价格。中国也不希望来中国人决定这个价格，至少要和他们外国其他地方销售的价格大致相同。这个不是针对任何具体公司，这是一个商业的一般的规则，希望大家能够谅解。谢谢。
Thank you. Okay.
So, we have no more time for
answering question. And I believe these question and answer are excellent. And now I leave the room for Minister Zhou. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wang, for your excellent work. I also would like to express my appreciations for all the questions. Thanks to those questions that really help us to have a much in-depth and comprehensive understandings for such a great but complicated, sophisticated relationship between these two giants. Well, good relationship between China and the United States very much depends on the communications and understandings between the two people. One of the soft power or small power is to promoting the cultural exchange. As a small effort on this, I'm delighted to take this opportunity to present President Carter and the Carter Center with the English language collections of research on Chinese culture and Chinese civilization, book of about 10 volumes. I'm both honored and humbled to extend the book to President Carter today and hope it will make the beginning of the long-term book exchange program between Shanghai Association of American Studies and the China Research Program of the Carter Center.
This is one of 10 books, and I'd like to give one small gift in return to Mr. Zhou, and that is a book that I've just written. It's my 28th book, and I hope it's not a very good exchange for 10 major books in Chinese, but this has been interpreted into Chinese, so he won't have any trouble sharing it with his friends. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this year's Barnett-Oksenberg Lecture will soon come to the end. Today's dialogue has been truly wonderful, and the exchange of views has really helped us for the conversation, for the understanding. On behalf of the event organizer, I would like to pay tribute to the facilitators, especially the Chinese People's Association for Friendship with Foreign Countries, the Shanghai People's Association for Friendship.
This is one of 10 books, and I'd like to give one small gift in return to Mr. Zhou, and that is a book that I've just written. It's my 28th book. And I hope it's not a very good exchange for 10 major books in Chinese, but this has been interpreted into Chinese, so he won't have any trouble sharing it with his friends. Thank you very much.